Hey everybody, it's Josh Goodman from the State Archives of Florida. For the past few weeks, we've been celebrating St. Johns County's approaching 200th anniversary by looking at some incredible documents in the collections of the State Library and State Archives in Tallahassee. This week, we're going way back in time to talk about the Spanish colonial era, essentially from the 1500s up through the transfer of Florida to the United States in 1821. Now, our collections aren't as voluminous for this time period, which is partly because Florida was indeed a Spanish possession at this time, and so many of the administrative records that you would expect to find for later time periods in our holdings, we just don't have those for the Spanish era. Those are held by other archives. We do, however, have some amazing stuff from the Spanish colonial period, including the beautiful map that we're looking at right now, which is, fun fact, the oldest object in the State Archives of Florida. This is a 1589 hand-drawn map of St. Augustine created by Italian cartographer Battista Boasio. It is depicting the raid of English corsair Sir Francis Drake on St. Augustine on May 28th and 29th, 1586. The English and Spanish were at war at that time, and Queen Elizabeth I of England had sent Drake to lead an expedition to attack Spanish ports. Now, this is not the only stop on Drake's voyage of destruction. He also sacked Santo Domingo in what is now the Dominican Republic, and also Cartagena in what is now Colombia. But this was one of the stops, and you are seeing there's the English ships in the harbor there. Here's Anastasia Island. You can see the watchtower that was erected by the Spanish here, the arrival of some of the ships on shore, some of the fighting. And you can also see some of the things that are going on here on the mainland. Just a couple of things to note. Before I get started looking into this, I do want to point out how I got here to this map. This is, I'm going to zoom back out here just a little bit. This is one of many, many catalog records here on the Florida Memory website, floridamemory.com. Super easy to get to. And I found this by searching for Boasio, just because I happen to know that that's the name of the cartographer, so I thought it would be a quick way to get here. You can see that we've got a couple of different things that make reference to Battista Boasio, but this is the map right here. Super easy to get to. You can download a nice high-res version of this map. You can see lots of good information about the map. We've got a transcript of the key to the map that is original to it down here at the bottom. But I think the best thing to do is to click on the map and to spend some time just looking at it, because it's pretty awesome. It will take just a moment to load. That's because we do make, since this is such a special document, it is the oldest object in the archives, we have made a really nice high-resolution JPEG version of it available. In fact, if you zoom all the way in, which I'll do real quick, you can see this is pretty darn clear on what is a pretty big map here. But the best way to zoom in on this, I think, is to use the control key on your keyboard and then to use the scroll wheel to just zoom in on the parts that you find interesting and then twirl around. So, for example, we have right here, if you hadn't guessed already, this is the original Castillo de San Marcos. You'll note the difference in shape and appearance from the fort that we recognize today. At this point, the fort was still made out of wood. It took a few times of the fort getting destroyed and portions of it being burned before the Spanish finally got smart and rebuilt it out of coquina, which was brought up from Anastasia Island just across the way here on the island in the late 1600s. Another thing, if we pan over here to the left a little bit, which is actually south, the way this map goes, we can see some of the buildings and some of the residential area here in the main village. Now, you've got the townhouse right here, and if we zoom in just a little closer, you'll notice that there are letters that are located next to the main features of the map. And if you go down to the key on the map, the letters will tell you exactly what you're looking at. Like, look right for here. They say the town of St. Augustine, where dwelled 150 Spanish soldiers. Notice the really weird method of creating S's. You see that a lot in printed materials from this time period. So if we go back up to the town of St. Augustine, one other thing I thought I'd point out right here is marked with the letter O. This is the church. And I thought this is important to point out because even though it looks kind of small and humble right here, it actually is a very important church, because this is the forerunner of what we now call the Cathedral Basilica of St. Augustine. And so it's the same congregation all the way from the 1600s up until today. It's the same congregation, different building, of course, but this is the oldest continuously operating Christian congregation in the contiguous United States. So a pretty remarkable building that is still with us in some ways today, just not in that exact form. One more thing I'll show you before we leave the map here is down here at the bottom. This guy right here is actually a mahi-mahi, or a dolphin fish. And the reason why this is included, it's a little odd because he's obviously out of proportion with the rest of the map. Here's all these ships, and then here's this giant sea monster who seems to be leading them on their crusade along the Spanish Main. But Bautista Boazzio's maps were not only used for sort of describing Sir Francis Drake's New World conquests, but they were also used as illustrations in works that were depicting the flora and fauna of the New World. Now, this map is open for use. You'll notice, and by the way, you can see I'm zooming back out of all that. When you zoom in real high on a map like that, and then you change to a different page, you're going to want to do that. But this is free to download. There's no licensing required on using this. Obviously, this map's not copyrighted, and so you're free to use this in projects however you like. But this is not the only map that we have from the Spanish colonial era. The best way to get a look at all the maps that we have is to go to the Florida Memory website, go to the Discover menu, and you'll see all the different kinds of original historical records that we have: film, audio, maps, photographs, historical records. And if we click on Maps, that'll take us to the landing page for the map section on Florida Memory. And a really fast way to get to all of the maps from a given time period is to browse by coverage, which in our parlance on the Florida Memory website means time period. And you'll see that Florida has two different Spanish colonial periods, and that's because the British hung on to it for a couple of decades there in the 1700s. But let's click on the first Spanish colonial period. And it's going to take the server just a second to go back and find all of those. And here they are. We have 32 items found. And a lot of these are going to be maps of more than just Florida, but pretty much all of the Spanish New World. If we look on this one from 1582, for example, we'll click on this. We get some information about the map. If we know who the creator of the map was, who the cartographer was, then we'll put that on there. You'll get some information about how big the actual map is, 14 by 21 centimeters, so not exactly a huge map. This is pretty small, but we have taken the trouble of scanning these in at pretty high resolution copies, and again, you can download these. All of these from the Spanish colonial period are going to be way out of copyright, or no copyright ever existed on these. So no problems with using these in documentaries or projects, or just getting yourself a copy and hanging it up on the wall, anything like that. A couple of things you can do here. You can zoom and pan. When you're looking at these that are in the Florida Map Collection on Florida Memory, you can also toggle to a full page view, which is going to let you really get a nice view of everything that's going on. Look at all these wonderful Spanish place names, and some of them are still with us here. Some of them not so much. St. Joseph's Bay, that's still with us. A couple more. They've got this, this is Cape Canaveral. They've got it spelled slightly different here, and you'll see they've got the tilde over the N. Canaveral, I guess they were going for in that spot there. So lots of wonderful maps. Now, there's one other kind of record that I want to show you. And it is not a map. It is what we'll call a textual record, or a historical record. And it's, even though many of these records were compiled after Florida had become a part of the United States, many of the records themselves come from the Spanish colonial era. And they are the Spanish land grants. You've probably heard of these before. The Spanish granted land to many private individuals prior to Florida becoming a United States possession, and those grants continue to show up on maps long after the United States gets possession of Florida, because it was part of the agreement when Florida was transferred to United States ownership that the U.S. would respect those land titles. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get a full list here just so we can kind of show you what's going on. So a little bit of history about these. Florida was officially transferred to the United States in 1821. The treaty that affected that transfer, the Adams-O'Nees Treaty, had actually been originally signed in 1819, but there were some delays with the ratification. So it's a couple of years before everything finally gets settled in stone in 1821, and the United States actually takes possession of Florida in the summer of that year, in July of that year. Now, Section 8, or Article 8 of the Adams-O'Nees Treaty, essentially bound the United States to respect titles to lands that had been granted by the Spanish Crown or Spanish colonial officials. In fact, those folks were even allowed to have a little bit of extra time to fulfill the requirements for receiving a Spanish grant, because there had been a lot of unrest and different things going on in Spanish Florida, especially along the border for the last few years. And so because of the way the treaty was constructed, they made it so that these folks had some time. So Spanish authorities would give land to people for a variety of reasons. For example, they enticed settlers to come to Spanish Florida by granting land under what was called the head rights system. Essentially, people who wanted to get free land from the Spanish government, they would take an oath of allegiance to Spain, and they would bring people to Florida to settle, meaning family members, children, cousins, whoever. They could also bring enslaved persons as well. And so the Spanish government would grant land to these settlers based on the number of people, the number of heads, essentially, that they brought to Spanish Florida to settle. And then more land, they could get more land if they put that land under cultivation. Now, another reason why people sometimes got these Spanish land grants is they got it in the form of what was called a concession. And the Spanish government granted concessions for services to the Crown or to colonial authorities. So this could be militia service or clerical services or land surveying or something like that. And you can, when you look through the documentation for each claim, that's where you kind of get a sense of whether it was a concession or a land grant under the head rights system or something like that. So the Adams-O'Nees Treaty calls for these grants to be honored by the United States, but here's the problem. It's the 1820s. Anybody can pop up and say that they have a Spanish land grant. Anybody can write out a deed or write out some correspondence, or they can make this claim. The United States government had to have a way to know which grants were legitimate and which ones were not. So Congress solved this issue by establishing a commission that sent representatives down to Florida. They actually sent two different groups. One went to West Florida and one went to East Florida. And they put out an all-points bulletin to everybody claiming to have land under the Spanish land grant system. And they said, look, bring us all your documents, bring us your land surveys, your deeds, your titles, your correspondence with the Spanish government, everything you got. Go ahead and fill out a claim, and we will examine the evidence, and if it looks like everything's all above board and correct and comports with the law, then you'll get a clear United States title, and you can continue enjoying your land as you did before the transfer. However, not every claim actually was confirmed. Now, what you see before you are dossiers of documents that were used to prove these land claims, or dossiers of material that ultimately proved to be insufficient, and so the commissioners did not approve them. And so what you get in these, I'm just going to click on one. Here's our buddy John Addison, and this is a little bit to the south of St. Augustine. He's located along the Tomoka River. What you get in here is a combination of documents that are in Spanish and some that are English translations, and it sort of documents the entire process of acquiring these Spanish land grants. Now, not every dossier is going to have the exact same kinds of documents. Some will lack all of their Spanish documents. Some of them will only have English translations. Some of them will have only the Spanish and no English translations. Some will have both. And then some will have different kinds of documents supporting the textual side of stuff. Like, for example, these gorgeous, look at this, these beautiful hand-drawn survey plats. And because the Spanish did not have the advantage of having the public land survey system, which is the rectangular grid system into which all land in Florida is now measured, because they didn't have the benefit of that system, instead they had to use this pictographical representation to kind of show people sort of what was on the land, and they had to actually mark their boundaries with trees. So look, for example, here we've got Pino Marcado A, pine marked A. Looks like they've got another one here, Pino Marcado A, same thing, on and on and on. So you've got survey plats, you've got deeds, you've got letters in some cases. Sometimes you have, and these are going to really come in handy here in just a moment, I'm going to show you. This is an example of a U.S. government survey where the government land surveyors from the United States, when they came through surveying Florida out into the public land survey system, that rectangular grid system, they actually had to know exactly where this land was located because when they started putting in that grid system, they could not show this as being available public land because it was already spoken for in a private claim. So just all kinds of great documents in here. And one last thing to point out. The first thing that you're going to see in all of these dossiers is one of these little cards. And these cards were created almost more than 100 years after these documents were all compiled for those United States land commissioners. These were actually done by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s for a program called the Florida Historical Records Survey. This was one of those programs that the WPA was doing during the Great Depression to give people some work while the Depression was still going on. And so the Florida Historical Records Survey went through these records and they cross-referenced them with reports from the U.S. land commissioners in the American State Papers so that you can very quickly go back and forth in between these dossiers and the American State Papers, which are available, freely available online from Hathitrust and the Library of Congress and other places as well. And you can very quickly tell all the information that the commissioners took down about each claim. So, for example, with John Addison here, we can go to this book and page, look for this report, this line item on that report from 1825, and that's exactly where the data is on this. And then sometimes there will also be some additional testimony or some additional notes on the evidence that John Addison produced in order to get this claim. But of course, if you're looking at this dossier, you're already looking at the originals, so you're in pretty good shape there. So that leaves us with one issue left, and that is, all right, you've got a Spanish land grant. How do you know where this thing's located? How do you locate this in real space? And I want to, let's see, this guy's down near Tomoka. Let's get one that's located in St. Johns County. I happen to know that there's a woman named Clara Arno. Yeah, let's see. I think this is it. Yeah. There's a woman named Clara Arno who had some land in St. Johns County. Let's use a method for going from this dossier and being able to tell exactly where her Spanish land grant was located. So here's how we go about doing that. First off, I should mention that some of these are going to be easier to locate in real space than others. And the reason for that is that some of these will include in the grant dossiers, some of these will include surveys that were done by the United States government, by representatives of the United States government. And the reason why that makes it easier is that if the United States government surveyed the claim, then that means that it's going to get assigned a number that will make it locatable within the public land survey system. So here, for example, this is a survey plat of Clara Arno's Spanish land grant, and it's different from the Spanish one. This is, I just scrolled down and looked at, this is what one of the Spanish surveys looks like. You can see it's actually in Spanish, and here we go. Andres Bergovan, who's one of the big land surveyors for these land grants in the 18-teens, he's actually gone through and drawn this very lovely plat that shows Clara Arno's land and everything. But we don't really, if we zoom in here, and we can't zoom too far, the image starts getting blurry here, but you can see that this is the old system. They've got pines, being used as the borders and stuff, and there's no real, we get some compass bearings and things, but there's no real connection to any sort of grid system. We do find out here that James Arno, that these are his lands down here, and then we've got, let's see, what does this say? Lands of the Leonardi or Leonardin or a family. Anyway, it's telling you who the neighbors are here, essentially. Okay, and we've got the North River right here and all of that. So you're getting some basics here, but nothing that's going to tell you where this piece of land fits in the public land survey system. However, we get lucky here with Clara, because the government land surveyors did a survey of this private claim as well. And if we dive into the gibberish, this is a legal description. It's actually in very much the same form, to some extent, as the legal description that you might have for your own property. And here's the piece right here that is most important, right here. Section number 44, township number 5, south, range number 29, east. Ranges are always east and west. Townships are always north and south. It's just like when you were doing those X and Y coordinates on a coordinate plane in geometry class, except now, instead of dealing with points, now we are dealing with townships and ranges and sections. And I'll explain what that means here in just a moment. So how do we convert this designation, section 44 of township 5 south, into, what is that, 29 east? How do we convert that into being able to find this on a map? Well, we're going to need some help. We're going to have to actually go outside of the Florida Memory website for just a moment. So I'm going to grab a new window, and I'm going to go glorecords.blm.gov. All right, and this is the website of the Bureau of Land Management, which is part of the Department of the Interior, and this is their database of General Land Office records. And the General Land Office was the instrumentality that sort of managed the distribution of public land to private individuals, whether it was through sales or auctions or homesteads or whatever. And you got a couple of tools in here that are really handy. If you want to learn more about this, we do a class through the State Archives called Using Land Documents for Family History Research. By the way, we're always glad to schedule those classes with your local library or with with a historical society or something like that if you're interested in doing those. But what we need now is the land catalog. And if I click on that, it's going to take me to a map of the United States, and a bunch of these states are shaded purple. And what these are, these states that are shaded in purple are the ones where where land has been measured out into the public land survey system, which is a rectangular grid system for measuring the real location of land in real space. You'll notice that the 13 original colonies are not in the public land survey system, and the reason for that is that title to most of that land had already been granted by the time the United States was a thing, and so there was really no place to put the system. Which is not 100% true, but that's generally speaking, that's what's up. So, let's zoom in here, and remember that we said that in that legal description over here on Clara's piece of land, it says that her land is described as being section number 44, township number 5, south, range 29, east. So let's do that backwards. First thing let's do is let's find township 5, south, range 29, east. Now, townships, that is sort of the description of how far north or south you are. So, for example, you'll notice that this is township 4 south, 5 south, 6 south, 7 south, as we go farther south. So 5 south is not going to be hard to find. It's going to be this right here. And then the 29 east, that is an expression of how far east or west we are. So 29 east, that's going to be right here. 5 south, 29 east. You can see the numbers. And then within that, okay, you're going to see these small red numbers, and that's going to tell you what section we're talking about. Now, normally, if we pan over outside of all this Spanish land grant bonanza over here, Once you get away from where all these Spanish land grants are, most of the time a township is going to be 36 miles square, and then each one of the little squares inside the big square is going to be 1 mile square. So each section 1 mile square, each township 36 miles square. And you can see how they're numbered. Don't ask me why they did it that way. It's a strange way, I think, but that's the way they did it. Now, what the government land surveyors did for these Spanish land grants is, rather than just interrupt the numbering system to put these private claims in here, the way that they listed these private claims is they gave them numbers above the number 36. So they essentially just superimposed these Spanish land grants over the top of the standard grid system. And the reason they did that is they had to know where these grants were so that they knew what pieces of property could not be made available for public sale. Now, let's go to the next step. So what we need to know now is we need to know which one of these little weird squares is actually section 44, so we can see where Clara had her land. Let me go ahead and give you a pointer. Don't trust the numbers that are in, when you're looking at one like this where there's a lot of water, there's a lot of private land claims in here, and everything's all chewed up. Do not trust the numbers that are in this database. This is all done through some kind of algorithm, and as you can see, it has a tendency to fail. However, we can get a much better picture by selecting our state from the menu up here in the top right, and then we can put in the code for our township. We want township 5 South space range 28 East, and you can see it lets us choose it right there from the menu. It will select the township for us, and then we've got all kinds of tools. We can look and see who all received patents to federal land in that township, but what we want is we want these surveys. And we're going to actually get, by clicking on survey, a list of the plats that are available for this township from the Bureau of Land Management. And just a quick little trick. I mean, look at all these. These are all fun. Some townships have more than others. Sometimes there's just 1 or 2 plats available. Sometimes there's 20. You just never know. But if you're trying to determine where a particular land grant was located, look for these, what they call dependent resurveys. It's not always on the dependent resurvey, but it's a lot of times that's where you're going to find it. And what you're going to get is you're going to get the actual plat that was produced by a government surveyor showing where he had surveyed in all the sections, all the boundaries of all the sections, including all these crazy, wacky, weird-shaped private land claims. And I'm going to use this button here to toggle this out to the full screen. And what's great about these, if you're looking for Spanish land grants, is over here on the right, you're usually going to see a table that's going to show you the names of all the people who had private land claims in this township. And look, they all have numbers above 36 because the first 36 sections, those are reserved for that regular 1 mile square sections all the way throughout the township. But as we look at the list here, these are all people who have Spanish land grants, including Clara P. Arno, section 44. And here's all that same information that we saw cross-listed on that WPA card for Clara Arno. All right, so what we need to do now is we need to look around this map and see if we can find section 44. Unlike the first 36 sections, which occur very regularly, different surveyors kind of use different rules for where they put the sections above 36. So, for example, we're looking in the 60s up here, but then here's 39, 62. All right, we're going to have to go down a little bit. 62, 61, getting warmer. Let's see if there's anything over here, maybe. Ah, look here. 41, 42, I bet we're getting close. Giannopoli, that sounds like that name I was trying to pronounce from that other thing, so I bet we are getting close. Ha-ha! Look there! Clara P. Arno. And you'll notice that there's a lot of squares that seem to be on top of each other, and that's because it was possible for multiple claims to get confirmed that actually covered actually covered the same territory. And as you can imagine, this was quite a tangle for the courts to sort out. But at any rate, so what we show here, Clara Arno's piece of land, and if we go back to that, if we go back to this plat that the surveyor put in, you can see this sort of arrowhead shape. You can see that, and you can kind of see that reflected here as well. There's the arrowhead shape with that funny little bend right there by the creek. All right. So what else can we do? So this is, all right, it's all very well and good to find this on a historical map, but what if we want to know what's there now? Okay. Well, first of all, we know that we're looking at section 44. There it is right there. But another thing that you might want to do is if you want to look on modern maps, some modern maps have dropped these sections above 36, especially if these claims were later determined to be invalid. And so one good trick is to try and figure out roughly which one of the original 36 sections one of these things would have been. So for example, I see here that going across the bottom we've got section 32, section 33. Looks like Clara's claim was situated in what would have been section 34 of this township had the private claims not been there. So we'll look for section 34 on a modern map to kind of get a sense of where Clara's land was located. And of course it helps to know that it was right here on Marshall Creek. That's going to help us too. So I'm going to close out of this. I'm going to get back over to the land catalog and I'm going to go back over to that map. This is the map that we were looking at earlier. I'm still zoomed in on Township 5 South, Range 29 East. And I'm looking for, yeah, see, take a look at this. There's so much going on in there that the algorithm has not actually put section 44, which is Clara's, onto this map. Now, I mean, we can kind of see that pointy arrowhead looking thing right here, and that's helping us a little bit. But we can also look, and we can tell that 40, see the section 34 right here? That this would have been section 34 right in this area. And there's Marshall Creek, so we know we're looking at the right place. And the Bureau of Land Management has very kindly superimposed over this helpful interactive map the street grid for the area. So we can actually see, this is right off of US 1, the old Kings Highway heading right on down. And look, there's International Golf Parkway, which I think takes you out to I-95. Yeah, so very quickly you can see exactly how to get to this piece. So if you were a descendant of Clara Arno, or whichever Spanish land grant you happen to be looking for, you can essentially go put your feet right on the property that ancestor had, which we think is an amazing way to use these records to be able to really connect spatially with where people lived in St. Johns County and elsewhere during the Spanish colonial era. Now, before we go, I wanted to leave you with a little bit of contact information for the State Archives Reference Desk. Here's our phone number and our email address and some databases with lots of handy stuff. We were on FloridaMemory.com. We did not look at anything in the Archives online catalog or the library's online catalog today, but those are always great places to look for good Florida history resources as well. Now, the process that we use to find Clara Arno's property through the Bureau of Land Management, that works great if you have a U.S. government land survey in the claim dossier for the Spanish land grant you're researching. If one of those surveys, one of those U.S. government surveys is not in the dossier, it's a little bit harder to look for. There is a method, but it takes a little bit more work. We are glad to help you with that research process, so give us a call, pop us an email, and we'll be glad to help you with that research process. So that's all for now. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions about the material we've covered today. And once again, happy 200th anniversary, St. Johns County.